Welcome to Baking Wisdom, my latest series based on my new cookbook of the very same name. In each episode, I want to share a delectable recipe and pack it full of baking tips because my wish is to make you a better baker. And you know, as bakers, we love to share our information, recipes, and more. So on this episode, I'd like to introduce a special virtual guest. Sam Turnbull is the author of 2 vegan cookbooks, Fast, Easy, Cheap Vegan and Fuss-Free Vegan. And you might find her on your social media channels as It Doesn't Taste Like Chicken. Now, Sam Turnbull has a lot of insight into adapting recipes to veganize them. Sam, it's so nice to see you again. We met, what was that, about 6 months ago for the first time?
Yeah, November of 2022, I believe.
In the beautiful Rocky Mountains at a really fun event, Christmas in November. I remember on our downtime, we had some chats about vegan baking. So I wanted to take a few minutes and just pick your brain because how long have you been a vegan?
10 years.
Wow, 10 years. And when you made the switch, when it comes to baking, what were some of the biggest changes or surprises you found in converting from conventional baking to vegan baking?
The biggest surprise for me was probably with the use of eggs, because of course I grew up baking all sorts of recipes with eggs, cookies, cakes, and in a lot of recipes, you actually don't even need the eggs at all. And one of the things I always point out is a lot of people say that maybe vegan baking is gross or bland. They think of a vegan cake and they're like, oh, that's going to be so gross. And I always point out, I'm like, I've never heard anyone say, I wish this cupcake tasted more eggy.
But now, talking about the functionality of eggs, how do you replace eggs in anything that calls for a meringue or any type of whipping egg whites?
Aquafaba is a really great substitute for egg whites. And if you don't know what that is the liquid in a can of chickpeas. It's actually high in protein. It has kind of a very similar viscosity as egg white, and it foams up just like egg whites. You can make meringues and everything with it. It's really cool.
We have to touch on the other topic, the B word, butter. It's the cornerstone of so many North American and European baking recipes. How do you replace both the fat and the flavor contentedly in your vegan baking?
Well, these days, we're very lucky. Most grocery stores, I'm going to say your local grocery store for sure, would carry a vegan butter substitute. So some people would call that margarine, but you do have to be careful because not all margarines are vegan. A lot of them do contain milk products, but there are ones that are specifically labeled as vegan, and those have the same texture, this very similar flavor, and they work pretty much the same in baking. So it's a really easy sub, actually.
If you're new to vegan baking, where do you start? What style of baking do you recommend? How do you make yourself comfortable in a vegan baking kitchen?
Well, I think one of the mistakes that a lot of people do is they first try to veganize one of their old favorite recipes and make it vegan just by doing something like a flax egg, which can sometimes work, but also sometimes doesn't work. And so if it doesn't work, it can be disappointing. So instead of trying to adapt one of the recipes that maybe you're used to making, instead I would look up a vegan version of that recipe. So from websites such as my own or other cookbooks, there's tons of options, but these recipes have already been tested by an expert and proven to work. So they're a lot more reliable. And then if you do want to get a little bit more experimental and start developing your own recipes or adapting some of your old favorite recipes, you can do that, but just know that it doesn't unfortunately work as a one-to-one substitute for everything. You do sometimes have to do a little bit of tweaking to recipes to make them taste just as good, if not better, than the original.
Well, and I think, Sam, you brought up a very good point that, rarely have we found, and I'm sure you agree in the work you do too, it's rare that there is a one-to-one substitution. An ingredient is chosen for one function. You can't just pull it out and expect something else to fit perfectly. So sometimes you do have to wiggle your ingredients around a little bit.
Exactly. For eggs, for example, people make flax eggs, they make banana, or like use banana in place. They use silken tofu, they use applesauce. There's all these different options, but you can't just assume that applesauce is going to actually work the same as an egg in a recipe. You actually have to figure out what the recipe is calling for the egg. Is it binding? Is it raising properties? Or is it just the fat? And then once you figure that out, then you can actually make better decisions about what to substitute.
I have flagged a recipe that I'd love your guidance on in terms of adapting it to vegan baking. I know you can lend insight onto my, and I'm putting it out there, my brown butter cherry financier.
Definitely not the easiest recipe to veganize. This is one definitely requires a little bit more skill. Financier, love it. Yeah, those are a little bit more complicated to veganize for sure.
I'm not afraid of a challenge if you aren't.
No, I love challenges.
So the first thing you have to do in this recipe is brown butter, and knowing that it's the milk solids in butter that caramelize and give the butter its toasty taste, I somehow want to impart, the color is less important, I want to impart flavor into the butter, because you'll notice in the recipe there's no almond extract, there's no vanilla. It's a very fundamentally simple recipe.
Yeah, so unfortunately, vegan butters don't tend to brown well. Maybe they'll figure out that science in the future. But the recipe does call for ground almonds. So for me, that was a really easy thing to substitute. Just use your brown or your almonds and toast them a little bit just in a pan on the stove gently so they get a nice golden color. And that'll add some of that toastiness, that warmth of flavor in there as well. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, and then for the eggs, financier, it's a little French delicate cake you would put on a petit four plate. So I don't want to see the speckle of a flax egg in place of the egg whites.
Yeah, I think flax egg as well would be too heavy for this recipe. Flax tends to make things kind of dense. So a really easy option would be the aquafaba that we talked about. For one egg white, it's usually about 2 tablespoons of aquafaba. So in this recipe, you could use 6 tablespoons of aquafaba, which is the chickpea water, which would be great. And it whips up just like we're talking about.
Any recommendation, because you can buy regular chickpeas and salt-free or low salt. Does it make a difference? Do you taste the chickpeas?
Definitely makes a difference. I recommend getting the unsalted chickpeas. Sometimes it says on the can. Sometimes if you just read the ingredients, you can see if salt is added or not. And the reason is, of course, salt draws out the flavor. So the ones that are salted, the aquafaba might actually taste a little bit like bean, which if you're making a savory dish, that's probably fine. But for a sweet, delicious, little cake, you don't want that. So get the unsalted kind of chickpeas, and then you can make hummus afterwards too.
Sam, you have offered some amazing insight. You've obviously done your homework. You know the facts behind vegan cooking and baking. Your recipes are just so instantly appealing. Do you have copies of your books handy?
Yeah, so I have 2 cookbooks right now. My first one is Fuss-Free Vegan. This is 101 recipes that are everyday favorites veganized. So things like pancakes and salads and soups and cakes and cookies and pies and pizza and tacos and all that stuff, which is really fun. And then my second cookbook is Fast, Easy, Cheap Vegan. And this is 101 recipes that all take 30 minutes or less to prepare, use 10 ingredients or less, and cost $10 or less for the entire dish. So it's really good to bust those myths that veganism has to be expensive, time-consuming, and complicated. And I also have a third cookbook coming out at the end of the year, so stay tuned for that.
Exciting. Well, congratulations on that third book. As we know, cookbooks are a bit of work and quite an accomplishment. So I'm just so pleased for your success. And I really thank you for being here so you could share your baking wisdom with us. It's been wonderful, Sam.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your beautiful new book. I'm definitely going to be veganizing several of the recipes in here, although there's also some that are already vegan just by default. So I'll be trying those as well. Can't wait to dive in.
Thanks to Sam's advice, I am confident I can deliciously veganize my brown butter cherry financier. Not brown butter anymore, because I am going to use vegan butter. And I'm going to take Sam's advice and brown it, but brown it with almonds so that it picks up an intense toasted nut flavor. So this is vegan butter, unsalted, and I did check, it doesn't have palm oil in it. I really want to concentrate that almond flavor. So instead of toasting the ground almonds that are within the batter recipe, I'm toasting half a cup of sliced almonds instead. I'll be able to use that, sprinkled onto a salad or something delicious. I treat this step just like I would if I were browning dairy butter. Melt the butter on high heat and let it froth and cook, and I'll know when it's ready when the almonds have toasted. Browning your vegan butter and almonds together takes about the same time as browning dairy butter, and that takes about 3 to 4 minutes. The vegan butter doesn't stop frothing, so you want to lift the almonds up to see how toasted they are. When those sliced almonds are rich golden brown, then you know your butter is ready. Since I'm not using the almonds in this recipe, I'll strain them out. But now I've got vegan butter toasted almonds to use in other recipes. You want to let your vegan butter cool for about 15 minutes. It should be fully at room temperature before you use it. In the meantime, I can start on the base of the financier batter. Now, a financier is a French little cake, and originally its shape was in a gold bar, and hence the name financier, and it was a golden color. I'm adding cherry to mine, and I'm going to color it pink. Sam and I were talking about substitutions for egg whites, and she recommended aquafaba for this recipe in particular, the strained liquid from chickpeas. So I've got 90 milliliters, the equivalent of 6 tablespoons, and that replaces the 3 egg whites that I originally called for in the recipe. And I did take her advice and bought the no salt chickpeas, and it doesn't even smell like chickpeas. I'll add my sugar, and then let's give the aquafaba a little whisk up. I'm not trying to make a meringue necessarily, but I want to lighten and aerate the aquafaba, so that's what gives the financier a lift. There is no baking powder or baking soda in the recipe. It's just the volume from this slightly whipped aquafaba. She did say it would take longer than regular egg whites. I'm using room temperature aquafaba because I want the sugar to dissolve in it. Okay, I wasn't whisking for that long. It really was about 4 minutes, and the aquafaba really does hold that volume. It's probably about triple in size. As I said, for this recipe, I'm not looking for a meringue that's whipped to a soft or medium peak. Just frothy and foamy is sufficient. Now it's time for the dry ingredients. I have my ground almonds that are a signature ingredient in financier. I'll add my all-purpose flour. And for a little bit of background flavor to match with that almond toasted butter, a little ground nutmeg. Wow, that aquafaba really holds its volume. It feels just like when I make this recipe using egg whites. Amazing. Now for my cooled butter. Oh, you can really smell the almond flavor. That's going to give these financier a lot of depth and character. It's a little cake, so it needs to pack a big flavor. You don't have to add color to a financier recipe. I am, because I want to play on that cherry idea. I'm going to put a little Amarena cherry in the center of each. I did research this brand of food coloring, and I know it is certified vegan. And that is more than enough. Just that one drop. The batter has to chill for at least an hour before you bake it. You can also make it a day ahead. So I'll transfer it to a smaller container and pop it in the fridge. I've got my chilled financier batter, and in addition to that, I've also chilled the pan. I greased it, and then I popped it in the fridge for about 15 minutes. And I find the cold batter and the cold pan hitting the heat of the oven really coaxes a nice little lift out of the financier when they bake. I am adding a piece of an Amarena cherry to the center of each. And I'm glad I had that chat with Sam because I went and checked the ingredients carefully. She mentioned maraschino cherries and color, but these are different and they contain only natural ingredients. And I could verify that they are vegan. A traditional financier is baked in a rectangle-shaped pan. Not everyone has one, including me, but I find a mini muffin tin works just fine, and this recipe makes 24. A little goes a long way. These are little cakes, so I use my tiniest truffle scoop and drop just a little bit, about a teaspoonful of batter in the bottom of each. Okay, I cut each cherry in half and I can drop that in, just pressing gently. You don't want to push through the bottom of the batter or the cherry will sink as it bakes. Now I need to cover the cherries with the remaining batter. I find it easier to do using a piping bag. These will melt into place as they bake. I've preheated the oven to 400 degrees and they'll take only about 15 minutes to bake. I do find my vegan version of the financier brown a little more around the outside edges. So don't worry about that. It's factored into the recipe. They taste delicious. Here are the financier out of the oven and cooled. You can let them cool in the pan on a cooling rack and then they just pop out easily and you've got these, a concentrated flavor in a tiny little cake. Absolutely delicious. And there's that cherry right in the middle. It's so true what Sam said. You would never guess there wasn't butter and eggs in this. It is delicious and tender, and the texture is beautiful. You know what? Sam gave me so much perspective when it comes to vegan baking, and now that I've got that insight, I am going to explore how to adapt more of my recipes and veganize them. I've learned so much from Sam. I hope you've learned a lot from me. I know you can take this recipe and make it your own. I'll see you again for another episode of Baking Wisdom.
I couldn't resist. Look at that. Beautiful. They smell amazing. I didn't put the pink dye in these ones. I put a little bit of almond slices on top and they smell amazing. Yeah, they turned out really well.